Hello and welcome back to Dystopia Now. I am Kate Willits,
I'm Emile Torres.
and today we are going to do an episode that we have been planning on for a long time, where Emile is going to share with me uh, the philosophy of human extinction, which I think is highly relevant to what we talk about on this show and is Emile's scholarly area of expertise. Yes.
Yeah, insofar as I have any, this would be
Yeah.
it. So,
I'm really sorry, but there's something that perpetually hits my funny bone about studying human extinction. It's just so dark, but just like, but no, I mean, it's important to study, and I completely understand why you studied it. But it's such a funny thing to spend like 15 years immersed in books about. I wonder sometimes, like, does that give you anxiety or does it alleviate your anxiety or
yeah, good
both?
good question. I said on one of the earliest podcast episodes that we recorded that kind of the darker the topic, the greater the chance is that I'm going to be interested in it.
Yeah.
Like I will relax in the evening by watching videos of videos that go through all the details of major aviation disasters. Right? I don't know
Yeah.
why, I just find it really interesting. And I mean, with respect to human extinction in particular, um, there is a sense of control. Um, maybe I'll qualify that in a moment. That one can get studying this topic, right? So you by getting rid of the uncertainty, one could feel a bit more like a bit less anxious, right? Because
That makes
uncertainty
sense.
is the fertilizer of anxiety,
Yeah,
in
that
many
makes
cases.
sense.
Yeah. So rather than wondering, um, without any points of references to help me navigate the situation, wondering like, are we in a bad situation? Now I have a much better sense, and to be honest, my conclusion after having been in the field of existential risk studies for so many years, I mean a decade, uh, is that the probability of human extinction is pretty low. I think there's a possibility of rogue AI, but I think that's not an imminent threat, right? Because I think the large language models that we're developing right now are not going to lead us to superintelligence. So I think human extinction is not probable. I would actually agree with a scholar, a futurist named Bruce Tahn, who edited a special collection of the journal Futures in which people submitted scenarios. So it's part of like this kind of like scenario analysis issue, scenarios in which humanity goes extinct. And a takeaway from that special issue was that it's really hard to figure out how to kill everyone on Earth. you know,
Yeah.
and so Bruce Tahn went from believing that human extinction is actually quite probable this century to thinking that it's like 1 in a million or 1 in a billion chance, right? And that's kind of my view. Again, with like a few caveats, like maybe there's some kind of breakthrough in AI that finds a way to combine large language models with some other kind of system that results in superintelligence. I think if that's the case, then the outlook might be somewhat dismal.
It's
But beyond,
interesting
yeah,
because when most people talk about human extinction, like at least most people when I talk to like people around me about human extinction, the first thing that someone would say to you is climate. Like
yes,
I think that the AI extinction, I know that there are a lot of people that believe that, but not around me, you know?
yeah,
Like that
yeah, yeah,
seems to be kind of hyper localized in Silicon Valley and the tech community or people who are adjacent to it. I
yeah,
know a lot of people who do think that everyone's going to die from climate change pretty soon.
yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the things that became apparent to me when I was writing part one of my last book, which is History of Thinking About Human Extinction, is that the term human extinction is quite elastic.
Hmm.
This is an issue that we will get to probably in part two of this two-part podcast series. So I think that one needs to be careful about what exactly is meant by human extinction, because oftentimes people mean something like civilizational collapse by human extinction. Um, there are people in like the early 20th century who talked about human extinction, but if you really examine what they were referring to, they meant like the collapse of their society, or even the collapse of Western society, which they thought was like the pinnacle of all human achievement. So it would basically be tantamount to the world ending, right? Um, and so, I mean, you mentioned at the very end that climate change, that the people you talk to believe that climate change could kill literally everyone on Earth. That's a view that I think almost no scientists actually accept, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, there is a small chance that there's a runaway greenhouse effect, which is not merely hypothetical because it happened on our planetary neighbor Venus, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
the main greenhouse gas that drove that runaway phenomenon was water vapor rather than carbon dioxide. But nonetheless, it was, there's this positive feedback loop where the hotter it gets, the more greenhouse gases there are in the atmosphere, which makes the surface of the planet even hotter and so on. So we could potentially cross a threshold that triggers that kind of positive feedback loop. But I think the consensus right now is that that is extremely unlikely.
Well, I don't
Much more.
think that when most people bring it up that they're thinking about Venus. I think they're thinking about the dinosaurs, that there was this whole like type of animal that is just completely gone now.
Yeah. But the kill mechanism there was totally different, right? I mean, that was the result of an asteroid striking
Yeah.
Earth and
But
then
an asteroid
kicking
that
up.
changed the climate, right?
Yes, but it changed the climate in a different way.
Okay.
So the way that the dinosaurs died was, well, first of all, there were dinosaurs in like North and South America that were essentially broiled alive, right, because of the
Oh
heat
God.
of the asteroid.
Yeah.
Yes, it's absolutely
Poor
terrible.
babies.
Poor babies. And then there was this massive tidal wave that would have wiped out a whole bunch of other creatures, populations in those areas. But the way that the asteroid affected dinosaurs on the other side of the planet was that it catapulted huge amounts of dust into the stratosphere. And the stratosphere is a layer of the atmosphere above the layer that we exist in, which is called the troposphere. And that's important because all weather happens in the troposphere, right? All the thunderstorms and so on. In fact, if you notice during the summer, for example, there would be these huge like cumulus congested clouds that sometimes create this like anvil shape at the top, where they sort of spread out. I mean, if you go online, you could search for pictures like this. That is because those clouds are reaching the stratosphere, right? A different layer, and they're not easily getting through. So that's precisely why they spread out. And so the reason I mention that is the weather is one way to remove particles from the atmosphere, right? They get caught up in clouds, they get transferred back to Earth through the rain and so on. If there's no weather up in the stratosphere where all that dust is, then there's no mechanism other than gravity for removing the dust from the stratosphere. That and gravity works really slowly. Right? It takes a long time for gravity to pull. So consequently, the dust can disperse all around the globe and block out incoming solar radiation. What that means, of course, is that there's no photosynthesis, food chains collapse, and these big dinosaurs that need a ton of food, they're going to die, right? And maybe like little critters that are able to hide and don't you need less food, they'll survive. So like the avian dinosaurs survived along with mammals that eventually evolved into us. And so basically, like the asteroid caused what is referred to as an impact winter, which resulted in sub-freezing temperatures in summer and pitch black skies at noon, right? And that would have lasted
Wow.
years or perhaps decades. So there's a sense in which the dinosaurs that were broiled alive were the lucky ones, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
And so we're not worried, we as in humanity, as a collective,
Mhm.
why aren't we worried about an asteroid or something like that? Why are we talking about, ChatGPT and Claude and not the
Yeah.
possibility of an asteroid hitting us? Although there are
Great.
a lot of action movies about it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Great question. And so first of all, like there are organizations that are concerned about large asteroids.
Yeah.
So NASA has its Near Earth Object project, which maps out. I think it's mapped out more than 90% of all the objects, asteroids and so on that are floating around Earth. Um, but the probability of a huge asteroid, like 10 or 12 kilometers in diameter, which is the size of the asteroid that hit the Yucatan Peninsula 66 million years ago, that is just really low. I think that happens once out of every 400 million years or so. So it's really
Okay.
unlikely. Compare that to a volcanic supereruption. Those happen much more frequently, like once every 50,000 years. So we should be,
Okay.
if we're like perfectly rational and we're looking at the numbers, we should be much more worried about volcanic supereruptions because they would basically kill, could threaten human survival around the planet in kind of a similar way because they inject sulfate particles up into the stratosphere. Those sulfate particles then block incoming solar radiation. So rather than dust, it's like sulfur, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a similar mechanism whereby people would freeze to death and starve to death as well. And we haven't had a supervolcanic eruption for, I think, like 40,000 years. The one before that, I know much more. I know much better. The Toba catastrophe happened 75,000 years ago, and might have reduced the human population to a mere 1,000 breeding pairs. Right?
Wow.
So it's a huge population bottleneck that might have been triggered by this volcanic super eruption that happened in Indonesia, and the effects spread all around the planet.
They say dating is hard now, you know?
Yeah.
Like that's just I'm just like, oh God, if there's only like 500 people that I could potentially be with, I hope someone's cool, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hope someone likes the same music as me. Yeah.
It's not a lot
Yeah.
of swiping on Tinder
Yeah.
before you run out. Yeah.
It's like living in a rural area, but that's all there is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess this kind of brings us to the question, a distinct class of questions, which concerns whether or not human extinction would be good or bad. Right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's
So
not where I'd go with it, but I get you. Yeah. It's weird to me that anybody like I guess I live in a community where everyone would be like bad, obviously, you know, like that being sort of open for discussion is not something that I know people who contemplate, you know.
yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting. First of all, it's just worth underlining there are two categories here. One are empirical questions about the possibility, probability, the cause or etiology, and so on of our extinction. You know, how frequently do large asteroids slam into Earth? How common are volcanic super eruptions? Could AI potentially kill humanity? What about like a runaway greenhouse effect? So those are all these really important empirical questions, but they're distinct from the ethical questions, right? Which has to do with the goodness or badness, betterness, worseness, and so on of human extinction. So as a philosopher, I'm particularly interested in these ethical issues. And you mentioned like everybody you know is going to say human extinction would be really bad. There are a lot of people out there who think human extinction would be good. um,
Yeah. I
and
understand. I mean, I understand that there are, you know, I understand that there are people who think that. I think probably the reason that I haven't met them is the community that I hang out with is probably more kind of I don't know, like humanities types, you know,
yeah,
like people who love, you know, art, music, literature, and you know, do see something kind of special about the human soul. But
yeah,
you know, I can imagine that if you're hanging out in a community of like, you know, hardcore climate activists, that you would find somebody who thinks that human extinction would be positive, as well as all these AI weirdos, as well as, you know, somebody who's just very mathematical and super, you know, super rational and just looking at the math of like what is humanity's impact on the planet, each other. I
yeah,
mean, it's sort of a dark view, but I think my life is structured in such a way to not come across it in real
yeah.
life. Yeah.
Good for you. So maybe like a useful point of departure is for me to ask you why you think human extinction would be bad. It's not a trick question. It's a question that I hope will open the door to recognizing that the topic is actually way more complex and, in a sense, rich than I think most people suspect. At least that's
I
my
feel like I'm
opinion.
in college again, but I'll do it. Yeah. We're just like
Sorry.
getting high in our dorm room. Um yeah, I mean, I guess I think it's bad because I think that something about humanity is inherently beautiful, you know, that we are capable of obviously evil, but, you know, compassion as well, you know, of philosophy, of art, of caring deeply for one another, and that is a beautiful thing, a variety of beautiful things that, you know, I would prefer to preserve, and that, you know, there's nothing that I see in the world in front of me that is, quite like us. I guess if maybe I had the assurance that there were, even more compassionate, artistic beings living a planet over or something like that, maybe I
Uh-huh.
wouldn't feel as strongly about it. But right now, I do, like, I'm obsessed with my cats. I love them so much. I don't want there to be cat extinction either. That would be so sad. But what I was going to say is, I do see a difference between humans and them in terms of like the level of, complexity and feeling that
Mhm.
we are capable of. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's probably why I think it's bad. Even though I'm like, I don't know if that's a good answer to the question. Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic answer. And it's actually not the answer I anticipated you giving.
What did you
Um,
think I would say?
I thought that you would probably have focused on all of the suffering that dying out would cause, right? If an asteroid
Yeah.
hit Earth, or if there was a super intelligence takeover or something, um, that's going to result in 8.2 billion people dying, which is just an unfathomable number of people uh, to suffer, to experience the agony, the psychological trauma of witnessing the human species go out of existence, and so on.
Yeah. Well, that, I mean, that would obviously be really bad, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah. So, um, this actually gets at, I think, one of the most important distinctions when it comes to assessing the goodness or badness of our extinction, and that is between going extinct and being extinct.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a parallel in the philosophical literature on death between dying and being dead. Right. So some
Yeah.
people have told me, for example, that they're not afraid of being dead. You know, I'm not going to exist. Like, it doesn't matter to me at all. But they're terrified of the pain that dying out, that dying might actually inflict on them. I've known other people who have said that no, it's the thought of no longer existing that is really terrifying. Like, yes, I'm scared about getting cancer or being hit by a bus or something, but no longer being around, like, just disappearing into the oblivion of nothingness. That is really scary, right?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, in terms of how I feel about my own death, I think that's a fairly good description. That I don't really have any anxiety about not existing anymore because I'm like, I won't know,
Yeah,
like I don't believe in an afterlife. I mean, maybe I could be open to like some abstract, well, like my energy
yeah,
continues to exist, some hippie shit or something. But I basically believe once you're dead, you're dead. But if I got cancer, I would be, afraid of the pain of cancer and the sadness of, saying goodbye to my loved ones. And
yeah,
that would be really awful. But once it's, once I'm in the ground, I'm not too worried about that part.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's super interesting. Um, I would have said in the past that I was deathly afraid of not existing, and
Interesting.
I'm kind of not anymore. I think part of it, to be honest, is my assessment of the world as like very bad, which is
Yeah.
basically it's all. I think one of the main reasons I didn't like the thought of not existing was FOMO, right? And
Yeah.
now that FOMO has been like largely erased, because I look around the world like, oh god, this place is terrible. So, but I am definitely very afraid of the pain of dying, and so this maps on to the question of extinction. So moving from the level of the individual to the species as a whole, um, you might say that human extinction would be bad because going extinct would be really bad, or you might say, well, no, the at least one of the reasons that human extinction would be awful is that there would be no more people around. Right? It's that
Yeah.
subsequent state of being extinct rather than the process or event of going extinct. And of course, you could
Or
point,
both. I
or
think
both.
both are bad. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, I was literally just about to say that. Yes, it could also be both. Um, so there are some theorists out there who have argued that there's nothing wrong with or nothing bad about being extinct. All that matters are the details of going extinct. And then there are others who have said, no, 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 being extinct is like the worst part of human extinction. And there's still others who would say that no, no, being extinct would be a good thing, right? Like maybe some environmentalists, maybe some people who are motivated by uh, thoughts of factory farming and all the wars that we cause and so on. Um, it reminds me of somebody I met years ago, back in 2019. I was at a bar in North Carolina, and I got to talking to this random guy who I can't remember his name. I've been calling him John. I called him John in my recent article on this issue. And we got to talking. He asked me what I do. I said, well, I study global catastrophic risk and human extinction. And that's either a conversation starter or a conversation ender, right? And for him, it was a starter. He was really interested in the topic. So eventually I asked him if he thought human extinction would be good or bad. And he said, good, definitely good. And he mentioned all the things that we have previously referenced: climate change, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, wars, global poverty, factory farming. There were some others. I mean, just in general, like the fact that there's a huge amount of human suffering in the world. He was like, all of that would be gone if we don't exist. And there's a sense in which we almost deserve to no longer exist. Interesting. So his immediate thought, um, his immediate thought when I asked him this question was to focus on being extinct, right? And during our conversation, I walked him through like just how incredibly awful going extinct could be, right? If there's like
Hmm.
a nuclear holocaust or something, exact same mechanism as asteroid impacts and the volcanic impacts that we were mentioning before, except rather than uh, sulfate aerosols or dust, we're talking about soot, right? In the case of nuclear weapons. So soot gets catapulted into the stratosphere, it spreads around the globe, blocks out incoming sunlight, and then the lights go out for us, right? So, I mean, that would be a truly, truly awful event, right? It would probably take years for humanity to completely die, and people would, starve to death. There'd be, outbreaks of disease and so on. It would be, horrendous beyond human imagination. And that actually got him to kind of change his views. I think John was an academic because we
Yeah.
were we were right by University of North Carolina, so he was like really open to changing his mind. And he was like, yeah, I don't know, maybe like human extinction would actually be really bad. And so the question is, was did he was he expressing an incoherent view, right? Did he actually change his mind? And the thing is that there's nothing incoherent about claiming that being extinct would be good and that going extinct would be terrible. Maybe so
Yeah.
terrible that we ought to avoid it, even if being
Yeah.
extinct would be good. And this
Yeah.
is a view that actually has been defended by a lot of pro extinctionists, right? So most
Hmm.
traditional pro extinctionists throughout history, going back to the second half of the 19th century with the German pessimists, uh, they were all motivated by the thought of human suffering, right? They wanted to end human suffering. Well, the best way to end human suffering permanently is for us to go extinct. So they advocated for human extinction, but they did not advocate for bringing about human extinction in ways that inflict additional harm on people, right? So if we fast forward to the 20th century, 21st century, there's a philosopher named David Benatar who is a pro-extinctionist, and he is absolutely clear that there is only one morally acceptable way to bring about our extinction, and that is by people voluntarily deciding not to have children.
Mm.
So he says that if going extinct were brought about, for example, by an individual who finds a way to kill everyone on Earth, that would be profoundly morally wrong for all the
Yeah.
reasons that murder is wrong. You should never, ever do that. I mean, that's called omnicide. So he is
Yeah.
very anti-omnicide, but he's still pro-extinctionist. He just wants us to do it via antinatalism, not having children,
I
right?
dated an antinatalist once,
Did
and it
you?
was super weird. We dated for a very short time. It's interesting because she was a very compassionate person. She was like a social worker and just, very kind to everyone around her. But she was extremely against people having children,
Yeah,
like extremely against it. Like she thought less of someone if they made the decision to have children, for example.
yeah.
And she told me once that she went to an antinatalist meeting for
Uh-huh.
people who felt this way. And she's like, yeah, everyone there was pretty weird. And I'm like, yeah, no shit. You think? You think the people that show up at an antinatalist meeting are gonna be like really normal? No. Yeah.
Do you remember our conversation with Brianna Joy Gray?
Yeah.
Because she expressed
I
basically
do.
this view. She was like, yeah, you shouldn't have kids. It's
Yeah.
terrible. Like, you know, she couldn't wrap her mind around why anyone would want to bring someone into the world. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's interesting because I have a somewhat unique, I guess, view on this because I feel very strongly for myself that I shouldn't have kids.
Yeah.
The thought it just like it terrifies me. It, almost in the same way. I know this is kind of there's a kind of logic to this, even though it sounds weird. It's the thought of bringing someone to the world is almost as bad as like murder. You know, and
Yeah.
I know that's weird, but it's the idea here is like you're making an existential decision for someone without their consent, right? In the case of murder and in the case of birth, you can't ask a child. But that being said, like I absolutely do not think that as a general moral rule, people shouldn't have kids. I really don't think that. Everyone needs to decide for themselves. And I've known people who, if they were to get to the end of their life and they're laying on their deathbed and they didn't have a kid, they would have felt like a source, a really important source of meaning was missing in their life.
Yeah.
And so I I just have to respect that. You know, it's not my experience, but I 100% respect this. So I do not look down on anyone who has kids in the least.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. I mean, the thing that I'm thinking of when you're saying this and, just in our whole conversation so far is like, with all these philosophers and their different views, it strikes me as there's something very kind of silly or pretend about pretending that like that these guys, these like super rational guys, or maybe there's some women in there too, or non-binary philosophers as well, but like these people are writing from emotional feelings that they have as much as anything else,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
this is it, the way that they feel about the world, their anxiety, their experience of being a person, it's all part of it,
Yeah.
like, it's not a purely rational exercise even for
Yeah.
the rationalists. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that feelings also kind of have a role in some parts of, well, I would say many parts of philosophy, right? Many different subdomains of the philosophical world. Um, there were two philosophers who, I think it was two, who somewhat famously used this phrase, the dull thud of conflicting intuitions, to explain the way that most philosophical debates end. Right?
Yeah.
There's no empirical thing, fact, etc., that you can point to arbitrate a discussion. Right? It just comes down to
Yeah.
like that just like intuitively it does not feel right to me. I do not feel the force of that argument. Right? I mean, it doesn't make arguments pointless, right? Because you can still like push and pull people in different directions. People can still have more or less rational views. But ultimately, like it really comes down to like kind of just this feeling called an intuition, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, antinatalism, I guess, like my personal antinatalism is rooted kind of in a feeling more than anything else,
Yeah.
but it's not universal antinatalism. And when my
I
friends
get you.
tell me, oh, we're expecting, I am sincere when I say, congratulations, that's awesome, da da da.
Yeah, of
So,
course.
yeah, yeah. So, anyways, one of the three main views within the field of human extinction ethics is pro-extinctionism, which actually comes in two different forms, which we will discuss in part two. There's traditional pro-extinctionism and what I call, for lack of a better term, Silicon Valley pro-extinctionism. But the key
Okay.
idea um, uh, of pro-extinctionism is founded. It is predicated on that distinction between going extinct and being extinct, right? Because
Okay.
so like when a traditional pro-extinctionist says, "Oh yeah, I think human extinction would be great," you need to ask them a follow-up question. Well, do you mean like killing everyone would be good, or like everybody suffering as a result of some natural catastrophe that we weren't able to stop? Do you think that would be good, or are you saying that the non-existence of humanity, that is the thing that would be good? And most of them will say, oh yeah, yeah, no, 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 I don't advocate for omnicide. I don't want anyone to kill humanity. That would be terrible. I don't want
Yeah.
tons of people to suffer, but I do think that the subsequent state, like once the deed is done, then things are better. Right.
Yeah.
So this brings us to a second position, which
Okay.
is called equivalence view. So equivalence theorists, they disagree with pro-extinctionists. Their claim is that being extinct is not good, as the pro-extinctionists argue, but rather it's neither good nor bad. It's just a completely neutral state, right? And consequently, I gestured at this earlier. The the goodness or badness of human extinction comes down entirely to the details of going extinct. And one reason that equivalence theorists might hold this view is they might say, well, being extinct is in a sense a victimless crime, right? The
Yeah.
reason is that there's nobody around to suffer the non-existence of humanity. Nobody is
Yeah.
harmed by being extinct itself, right? Going extinct could hurt a lot of people, but being extinct isn't going to hurt anyone. And so if there is no harm associated with being extinct that you can point to, then where is the wrong? Where is the bad? Right? It doesn't exist. um, so in this sense, being extinct is completely morally irrelevant, right? So in a catastrophe that causes human extinction would be the worst possible catastrophe. Why? Not because it results in human extinction, but because it would, by definition, result in the highest possible body count, right?
Yeah.
So being extinct is just completely irrelevant, and everything you might say about the badness of human extinction can be said in ordinary moral language. You don't need some like extra concepts to understand to evaluate human extinction. You could just say, well, yeah, this would be bad because catastrophes are bad, but if humanity were to go extinct as a result of everyone voluntarily deciding not to have children, that would not be bad, right? Because there's nothing obviously bad with somebody, an individual like myself deciding not to have kids. There's nothing obviously bad about that. And so consequently, there's nothing obviously bad about going extinct. And since everything is reducible to the details of going extinct, human extinction wouldn't be bad as a whole. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
um, so again, pro-extinctionists say going extinct might be terrible, and that could be a good reason to avoid human extinction, but being extinct would be a better thing, right? It would be good in some sense. Equivalence theorists say talk of being extinct is just completely irrelevant. No one's around. It doesn't matter, right? But if going extinct causes lots of harm to people, then human extinction would be bad. If going extinct causes no harm, if it's done voluntarily, then human extinction is not bad at all, right? And so I'll introduce a little thought experiment in a moment that I hope will make this a bit more concrete. So there's one last position, which I call further loss views. This is a class of views that claim that evaluating human extinction is a two-step process. So
Yeah.
first of all, look at the details of going extinct. If going extinct causes lots of harm, then that contributes to the badness of human extinction.
Okay.
Step number two, make a list of all of the things that we would lose if being extinct were to obtain, were to come about, right? So these things might be like future generations, future happiness, um, future breakthroughs in science, new technologies, moral progress towards an increasingly just and fair society. Um, you could go on, right? You could list all of these different things. Mary Shelley, in her book *The Last Man*, which she published in 1826, which was actually inspired by a mini volcanic winter that happened in 1816, which is known as the year without a summer.
Oh
Because
wow.
yeah, there was this a volcano that erupted. It spewed all of these like sulfate aerosols into the stratosphere, and it cooled down the northern hemisphere quite a bit, such that in the middle of the summer there were lakes in New York State, that were frozen over middle of summer.
Wow.
And so Mary Shelley was hanging out with Lord Byron by Lake
Who
Geneva.
was a real freak? That
Yes, yeah,
guy. Yeah.
he really was. But anyway, so they were hanging out together because they were buddies, and this year without a summer happened, and that inspired Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, as well as Lord Byron's poem Darkness, which is about human extinction. So this event also influenced Mary Shelley's later book, The Last Man, which is, as the title suggests, about the last man on Earth. And he is the last man because there is a global pandemic that spreads around the world and slowly kills off everyone until he's the only one who remains. And in the book, Shelley doesn't explicitly address human extinction, but there are points where she, for example, says that if humanity were to no longer exist, we would lose valued things. She's this whole long list: knowledge, laughter, poetry, philosophy, music, theater, technology. All of these valued things would disappear along with us. And so the suggestion is that she has a further lost view. So she's saying that the badness of human extinction, it goes above and beyond the harms that going extinct might inflict, right? And it
Yeah.
should also include all of these other valued things, future generations, laughter, friendship, etc., that we would lose, right? And so many further lost theorists would say that the worst part of extinction is not going extinct. It is rather the subsequent state of being extinct, because our future could be huge. There could be lots of laughter and lots of friendship and many future generations, and we would lose all of those if we no longer existed. So the worst part of human extinction is being extinct, even if going extinct is terrible, right? And these people would also say that if people around the world were to voluntarily decide not to have children, that itself would be absolutely terrible, right? Because
Mm.
even if there's nothing wrong about going extinct, being extinct still results in the same outcome: no more of these future values or goods, right? Does that make sense? So we've got three different views. Equivalence theorists are going to say, no, going extinct harms no one. It's completely irrelevant. You know, all of those things like friendship and so on, those matter only insofar as they are experienced or have some impact on human beings. If there are no humans around to lament the disappearance of science and knowledge and poetry and music and so on, nobody's harmed by that, right? So that's equivalence theorists, and they would say, the only thing that matters is going extinct. The further lost theorists say, no, being extinct, that is the real key thing that you should look at when you're trying to evaluate the goodness or badness of human extinction, right? And so there is a thought experiment, which I first introduced in my book back in 2024, which I think helps to illustrate like the distinction between these three views. So you could imagine that there are two worlds. There's world A, which contains 11 billion people. And then there's world
Uh-huh.
B, which contains 10 billion. So 11 billion, 10 billion. Now imagine that there's an identical catastrophe in each of these two worlds that kills 10 billion people, right? So at a high level of abstraction, you might say that there's one event that happens in world A, namely that 10 billion people die, leaving behind 1 billion, right? There are two events that happen in world B. 10 billion people die and we go extinct because the population was 10 billion.
Hmm.
Right? Does that make sense? So,
Yeah.
so then the question is, does that second event in world B have any moral relevance? Right? And so equivalence theorists would say no. Why? Because the fact that world B results in being extinct is completely irrelevant.
Hmm.
Nobody's harmed by being extinct. um, um, those catastrophes are equivalent, right? Because on equivalence views, the goodness, badness, etc. of human extinction is equivalent to the goodness, badness of going extinct. Period.
Yeah.
Further lost theorists would say, no, there's a huge difference between these two worlds. World B, which results in human extinction, forecloses the realization of all future value and goods, all of that laughter, those future generations, and so on. And that is a really terrible thing. World A, in contrast, where 1 billion people survive, that enables humanity to potentially rebuild civilization, repopulate the planet, and still go on to realize all of those, future instances of friendship, all of the scientific breakthroughs that lie ahead of us, and so on. So world A is much better than world B, even though the catastrophe in world A is absolutely terrible, right?
Yeah.
And so the third view, pro-extinctionists, they would say, or at least most of them, that the situation in both worlds is absolutely terrible because most of them don't want people to suffer, right? So they hear like, oh, 10 billion people died in world A, where 11 billion people exist. That is just absolutely awful. No one should want that. But they would say that there is a very bright silver lining to the catastrophe in world B. Why? Because once we have gone extinct, once we are in that state of being extinct, then all future human suffering, all of the wars, the genocides, all of the factory farming, etc., the environmental degradation, all of that goes away. Right. So in that sense, if they had to choose between world A and world B, they'd say, oh yeah, world B. World B is much better.
So it strikes me, and maybe this is kind of something that we'll get more into in our part two of this, but the average person, the average non philosopher's views on this, especially in the United States, I would guess, are religiously motivated.
Yes.
Like, it depends on, like, if you believe that everyone who should be in heaven goes to heaven. It's
Yeah.
completely supernatural, and we haven't even talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a great point, because everything that I've been talking about assumes a purely secular conception of the world,
Yeah.
right? So people have been talking about the end of the world for ages, right?
Yeah.
Jesus expected the end of the world, right? He told his
Yeah.
disciples that none of you will pass away before the Son of Man returns. He was, he's been described as a failed apocalyptic prophet. That's the sort of consensus view among biblical scholars in North America and in Europe, right? Ever since Albert
Jesus
Schweitzer.
was?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He predicted
That's
the end of the
funny.
world. It didn't happen, and in fact, he basically committed suicide. This is the idea that he tried to force the hand of God by having himself killed, because he was like, the world is supposed to have ended. It didn't. How can I make the world end? And so that's why.
Oh, I've never thought about this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So he was an apocalypticist, right? And so consequently, the founding of Christianity was in an apocalyptic milieu, right? The expectation that the end of the world is imminent, and oh my gosh, there have been so many different influential figures within Christianity, and different Christian movements that have expected the end of the world. But the key idea here is that the end of the world on a religious interpretation is not the same as human extinction, right? So you could kind of think about this somewhat roughly in terms of termination versus transformation, right? So on the religious view, the cataclysmic paroxysms at the end of time, the Battle of Armageddon, the grand battle between God and Satan, and so on, all of these things usher in a new beginning, right? Namely,
Yeah.
eternal life with God in heaven if you're one of the elect, or in perdition if you're a reprobate like me.
Yeah.
And so that is fundamentally different than this naturalistic notion of human extinction. It's something that I address in part one of the book, because it's easy to confuse. So one of my claims is that the idea of human extinction is quite new,
Yeah.
with qualifications. It actually dates back to the ancient Greeks, but they had a kind of very weak notion of human extinction, right? Some of them believed that we would disappear in the future. In fact, our disappearance is inevitable, but just as inevitable, we will reappear at some point later on, right? Because they believed in these cosmic cycles. So the universe is churning through different stages, and in one of these stages, we will disappear. In other words, we will go extinct, right? If the definition of extinction is that no humans exist, then we've gone extinct. But we will also reappear, right? So they like, in a really weird way, kind of combined the idea of human extinction with this other idea, seemingly incompatible idea that we are fundamentally indestructible, right? So the more robust notion of human extinction, that whereby we disappear entirely and forever, that was an invention of the 19th century. I mean, Lord Byron and Mary Shelley were among the very first people to actually discuss this possibility, right? It was a new innovation, a conceptual innovation that we didn't have before, because Christianity completely blocked it out, right?
Yeah.
What would it mean to say, like, at the end of time, God is going to balance the scales of, cosmic scales of justice, that, there's going to be this grand battle and so on, but humans don't exist. No, we are key players in that narrative. It just,
Yeah.
that whole narrative just completely falls apart if there are no more humans around, if we've gone extinct in this, like, robust sense of disappearing entirely.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and, like, the Christian stuff, I'm a very secular person. The Christian stuff is wacky, but if you think about, like, the influence on global geopolitics right now, it's highly relevant. The fact that, like, these Christian Zionists in the United States think that the end of the world has to be brought about like through Israel in some way, and they really want it to happen, the rapture, and like I mean, they're making like big political decisions, including war, based on this supernatural idea. People like Mike Huckabee,
Yeah.
or like Ted Cruz or whatever.
Yeah. Absolutely. This is why I have been over the past 20 years just as interested in religious apocalypticism as in the secular notion of human extinction. You can't understand some of the most momentous events happening in the world without some notion of Christian, Islamic, etc. apocalypticism, right? Their eschatological views. I mean, what you're describing here in the U.S., like the Christian Zionists, they have been termed by scholars the Armageddon lobby,
Yeah,
right?
they are.
Yeah, because there are two main reasons why they are so staunchly supportive of Israel. One is a verse in Genesis that says, "Those who bless Israel or the Jewish people will themselves be blessed." Right. But another reason is that they believe that the tribulation cannot happen without a Jewish state in Palestine. Right. And the tribulation is a terrible, scary event. But what lies on the other side of the tribulation is paradise. Right. So the only way to like finally get, for God to actually revamp the heavens and the earth and to start eternal life in heaven on earth is for these terrible, like I said, these paroxysms at the end of time to actually happen. So that's why they support Israel no matter what, right? They want the world's end to happen as soon as possible. Some of them even get giddy when they hear about wars breaking out in the Middle East. As long as Israel survives, that's all that matters, right? They have
And
this.
they have this shit with like the red heifer. I don't completely understand it, but there's like this special cow that they think
Yes.
has to a perfect red heifer that has to go to Israel, and they're like waiting around for this perfect red cow to be born. I don't fully understand it. You probably do. Yeah.
Yes. So that is so there is a red heifer, not just one, in Israel right now. And that's a big deal because that's another like sign of the times. That's an indicator that the end of the world might be. Uh
And this is coming from the Bible or somewhere else?
um Good question. I think it's from the Bible. I would need to refresh my memory before actually affirming that. But I mean, the fact that Israel was founded itself in 1948, that was seen as the like the most significant eschatological event since the collapse, since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, right? Because a lot of these Christians believe that the destruction of the Second Temple, 70 AD, that marked our current dispensation or like period or epoch or something. And and what was missing the entire time was a Jewish state in Palestine. Then Israel was founded, and oh my gosh, now the stage is set for the end of the world to commence. And that is really, really exciting to these people.
Wackos, in my opinion. I
Yeah.
mean, just...
I mean,
so
Christian
go ahead.
eschatology has influenced so many world changing events, uh, even over just the past 100 years, right? So, like,
Even over the past 2 years, I mean, the genocide in Gaza is deeply influenced by the fact that Christian Zionists in the United States believe that they have to support Israel no matter what to bring about Armageddon.
absolutely. Yes, 100%. Going back to, what was it, like the 1940s, the Balfour Declaration was
Yeah.
influenced by Christian apocalyptic beliefs, right? Exactly.
And it should be said that a lot of this stuff is deeply anti Semitic because what they believe is that all the people who are Jewish and live in Israel are either going to have to convert to Christianity or are going to hell. Like there's no room for just like continuing to embrace your Jewish faith or identity in this notion. And these people are framed as, you know, Jewish allies or whatever, but their beliefs are very anti-Semitic.
Yes,
It's crazy.
I
Yeah,
completely agree. And I think this is worth emphasizing. Um, on the Christian view, I mean, there's no Christian view. the specific view that a lot of evangelical Christians in the U.S. accept, during the whole point of the tribulation is to punish Israel for denying that Jesus is the Messiah, right? So this is God's punishment of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people will either during this period be slaughtered or they'll convert to Christianity. Those are the two options. And if they're slaughtered, they go to hell, right? And the tribulation culminates with the Battle of Armageddon, right, between Jesus and the Antichrist. That's also marks the second coming of Christ, and he fights the
Greta
Antichrist.
Thunberg.
Yeah.
Jesus fights Greta Thunberg. Yeah.
And so I completely agree that it's weird to see these evangelicals like joining hands with. I'll put it differently. It's weird to see Jewish people like in Israel joining hands with the evangelicals, because the evangelicals, they really hold like a deeply anti-Semitic view.
I mean, it's not, if we're getting into Israel's political alliances, I mean, they have supported Germany's far right party, that has like neo-Nazis in it. These are alliances of convenience.
Alliances of convenience, exactly. Yeah.
So what are we going to talk about in the second part of our series on human extinction here?
So I think, having established a few really important distinctions, going extinct versus being extinct, which is crucial for making sense of all the different positions that people can hold, and then identifying these three broad categories of views that one could have: pro-extinctionism, equivalence views that just focus on going extinct, and further loss views that also focus on the badness of being extinct. We could look at some particular positions that exemplify these different views. So like long-termism, for example, is a kind of further loss view, right? It says that the worst aspect of human extinction by far would be the fact that there are not going to be trillions and trillions of digital people in the far future spread throughout the universe, right? That is,
it's funny because it's not even people, it's digital people.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's not even bad for humanity to go extinct. We just need to wait a while,
Yeah. So we could talk about a few examples like that, as well as disambiguate the term human extinction in the first place. I mentioned at the very beginning, it's a highly elastic term. Not only do people use it as shorthand sometimes for referring to going extinct or for referring to being extinct, just like John did when I asked about human extinction, he immediately thought being extinct, as did you, Kate, which is what I thought was really interesting. You immediately described a kind of further loss view. Well, there's like this special value to humanity, and like the thought of the universe without that value seems like really tragic. Like the universe itself would be impoverished in some way if this very special species, us, no longer was, right? So, but human extinction is ambiguous in other ways, and in fact, depending on how you define it, that will determine whether or not certain positions like long-termism are classified as further loss theories, or alternatively as pro-extinctionist theories, right?
Okay.
So if you define human extinction the way that I prefer, long-termism is a pro-extinctionist view. If you define human extinction the way that they do, it's a very robust further loss view, right? So that's why it's really important to disambiguate this term. And I think that this conversation and pointing out the ambiguity of human extinction will really help people to navigate contemporary conversations about human extinction, because there are a lot of long-termists out there. There's some of the loudest voices screaming that we should avoid human extinction, and yet they actually endorse a kind of human extinction, right? And so by understanding the ambiguity of this term, the fact that human extinction is polysemous, has multiple meanings, that can help you sort of make sense of where people might be talking past each other.
That makes sense. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for outlining this stuff. And thank you so much also to our Patreon supporters. Without you, the show wouldn't be possible. I hope this was an interesting conversation for you that maybe illuminates some of the different versions of tech psychos that we talk about on this show. Thanks so much for listening, and we will be back next week with part 2.
Thanks so much.